All right, let's have a quick prayer and we'll get started. Lord, thank you for the opportunity to meet today. We are praying that your Spirit is here and that the information that you need to be shared is shared right now. We thank you, Lord, for allowing us to serve you in your holy name, Jesus. Amen. Okay, so last time we were just finishing up. If you remember, let's see where we're at. This was the slide we had. So we were talking about some of the different kinds of meetings. This was our last slide, and we ended there. So today I'm going to be talking to you about something different. And let me give you a handout here as well. Let me get, she's coming on in. Here you go. You're welcome. Okay, so this is, what I'm about to share with you is kind of revolutionary in my ministry. And how I do evangelism, and we incorporate this into our small groups leadership training. So primarily today we're going to be doing a lot of talking about leadership training and how we develop this, and then how do we grow these groups as well. So if you've ever seen one of these scales, this is called the modified Ingalls scale. It goes from -10 to 0, and then to +10. It may seem a little complex, but let me explain it to you how it works. So, how you doing? No problem. Here you go.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. So what we've got here is this is a spirituality scale, and Ingalls created this type of scale, and we modified it, but -10 is as far away from you get from God, basically Satan. And +10 is God or Jesus. And 0 in the middle is when somebody accepts the Lord. Generally, they're baptized about that time. And so everything on the left side of the scale is, we call it left of the cross, people who have not accepted Christ in their life yet. Everything on the right side of the scale is people who have accepted and are growing as disciples. And so if you look at your handout, it's got a little more detail than the slide does. So you see a -10 is somebody who despises God. They hate his people. They want his kingdom destroyed. They don't want to have anybody, how you doing? They don't want to have anybody living that loves God. And obviously you don't meet a lot of people like that. I have met a group like that once. I remember when I was a lot younger, I was in Washington State, and we used to do these kind of adventure things outside in these deltas on rivers. And we had other towns would come with and meet with us. And this group came and they had their teeth, I looked at them when they were smiling, their teeth were like vampire teeth. And I was looking at it, and they'd had their teeth all shaved by a dentist or something, and then these extended. They looked like vampires. And they were walking around talking about how glad they were that Jesus was killed. They were Satanists. It was that's a -10. You just don't see that very much. -9 just hates God's people, hates God, not necessarily wanting them to be destroyed, though. Here you are. Here's a handout for you, ma'am. You're very welcome. Oh, the wind's getting it. So, then you get to -8. So a lot of people think -10 would be an atheist, but no, that's around a -8. And these are more militant. They promote atheism. And they also hate religion. They think it should be done away with. And then you just keep moving down. You get to like number 5. Agnostic, sees no value in the Bible other than some good parables. Negative 4, there may be a God, but really not connected anyway. Not against Christians, but have little desire to connect with them. Then you get to people who are starting to move into religious realm. Negative 3, may claim religion. It doesn't necessarily have to be Christian. Finds the stories of faith interesting. May have some Christian friends. They're opening to testimonies about faith in a friend's life only. Negative 2, they're interested in Jesus. They're seeking to figure out who God is and how he relates to their life. They're open to conversations about faith and the Bible. Negative 1, they believe in the basics of Christianity and in Jesus. And the only step they have not yet taken is saying yes to the saving power of Christ. And so then, of course, 0 is the point where somebody accepts Christ in their life. So then you move to the right of the cross. And this is typically what we call discipleship, but really discipleship is the entire realm. But this is how people are growing. So positive 1 is a new or very immature person in their faith, and they're not starting to live their faith opening. Now, when we say new or immature, you could have somebody in their faith for 40 years and still be just a positive 1. And there's quite a few people who fall in that area. Positive 2, starting to change their lives. Their families, friends start noticing there's something going on. Something's a little bit different. And they're not sure exactly what that is. As you move on, you see that people are growing more and more in discipleship and all the way to positive 10, and that would be where you get to Jesus. Here you are, sir. You're welcome. So, how many people here are a positive 10? Yeah, none of us are a positive 10. And of course, you can make adjustments on this scale if you want. It's okay to disagree with me on exactly where these are, because I developed this, so it's not like it's something that's tested by millions of people around the world. It's just a scale that we use when we're training people on reaching people. And if you don't understand where people are spiritually, how do you know how to reach them? And so, let me give you some examples. Yes, please.
In positive 8 and positive 9,
Yeah.
it talks about the APEST.
Okay, good question. Okay, so APEST is based on Ephesians chapter 4, and I believe it starts in verse 11. And what it is that the gifts given by the Spirit, apostleship, prophecy, evangelism, shepherding, and teaching. So they're using whatever gifts they were given to equip the members to do the ministry. All right? So, so we want to make sure that when we're bringing people in as leaders of small groups, that they know how to share the good news with people no matter where they are on the spectrum of their faith and of this list. Let me get you one of these here. Let me hand you one of these handouts here, sir. You're very welcome. Welcome. Oh, let me give you one for him too.
Thanks.
Too much of that.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So, let me ask you a hypothetical. You have a neighbor who's in -6. Is the best way to approach them knocking on their door and saying, "Hey, how you doing, neighbor? Would you like to do a Bible study?" No, that's not effective. I mean, we do that often, right? That's kind of what we do. We'll mail out. I mean, those aren't wrong, what we're doing. Nothing we're doing is wrong. We mail out things for evangelistic series. How are they going to receive that? Not very interesting, right? Now, of course, in the 50 years ago, when we were doing that, the scale where people were at in this country was a lot different than we're at now. We've just crossed the line last year to where we have more people who are not Christians than who are Christians now. And it's rapidly moving more and more that direction. So we're moving as a nation farther and farther and farther to the left. And so a lot of the things that we were doing were very effective with the -3s, -2s, and -1s, the people, and even +1s and 2s of other faiths. We are very effective in reaching the majority of people because that's where the majority of people were. But now we're finding that people in those areas are a small minority now. And people are moving farther and farther away. And the fastest growing religion in America now is called nuns, where they have no faith of any kind. And so we need to, nun, N-O-N-E, nuns. Yes, exactly. Not like a nun with a habit on their head. Yes. So if you have somebody who is anywhere that's typically -4 or lower, you want to be able to reach them in a different way than we were doing in the past. And honestly, there's just one way. I should say the most effective way of reaching people who are -4 or less. Who can take a guess at that? Yeah, man, you got it right. Boom. You got to be a friend. You have to build a relationship. And so what we're developing here is, when we're training our leaders in small groups, we call this nudge evangelism. Instead of trying to take somebody from a -6 to a +1 in just a few weeks, we're trying to move people through relationships from -6 to -5, and then -4, and we're actually journeying with them on their spiritual journey to Jesus. And the best way to do that is to develop a relationship, a friendship with people. That is by far the most effective evangelistic tool for people who are -4 and lower. Now, God works miracles, and He can just immediately change somebody to go from a -8 to a +1 or higher instantly if He wants to. Yeah, He convicts the hearts. And so some people, it doesn't happen often, but some people move rapidly to the right. But what nudge evangelism is to be purposeful, to keep moving people to the right. And so what we talk to our small group leaders is one of your roles as a leader is to help every member in your small group. First, you have to identify where they are spiritually, and I'll explain how we do that. And then your role is to move them 1 or 2 spaces to the right during that term. Now, if you weren't here yesterday, we have terms. Is there anybody here who wasn't here yesterday? Okay, so we have, in our small groups, we have terms. We start at the same time and end at the same time. Typically, 3.5 month long sessions for our small group system. And so the leaders are going to learn, and we do a lot of training with this, they're going to learn how to move people spiritually 1 step at a time. And it's not that difficult. We're not doing anything that takes a massive amount of time. So anybody who's a new leader for us, everything we're going to teach you, we take them through 2 Sundays. And they'll learn all of this in 2 Sundays. There'll be a lot more than I can give you, obviously, here today. But we'll go through this in 2 Sundays, and once they become a leader, then we just have refresher things once a month as they're leading a group. So every new leader will just go through that first initiation of how to do these things. So let me give you a couple of things on this. First, when we're doing the training, we have to learn what the different things are, and you just learned that. What the different meanings are. and again, if you want to take this and use it in your church and change it, I don't care. It doesn't bother me. You could tweak it however you want. I'm actually thinking about tweaking number 8 and 9 because there's actually higher levels of discipleship than when I originally wrote that. These are things that we're just using based on both the Bible and just common sense as well. So once you get to the point where you have them understanding that, hi, how are you doing today? You have them understanding where people are spiritual or where the spiritual scale is. Then how do you figure out where somebody is without being offensive? You know, if you go to an atheist and they've joined your hiking group, or they've joined your photography group, small group, or any other type of group that you might have that would be interesting to somebody who's not interested right now in faith, then how do you find out where they are spiritually? Huh? Yeah, but listening, usually people don't talk about that if they don't have faith in their vocabulary. They don't just start talking about, I don't listen like God, or I'm an atheist, they don't just usually blurt these things out. So we have strategic questions and conversations. And it can be done in a variety of ways. I'm just going to give you a few examples. And once you see the examples, when you do training, you could come up with a lot more. And so when we're doing training, we actually have our leaders practice these things. We want them to be able to practice how to have these kind of conversations. So, an example, I am doing a hiking group. And I'm trying to get to know what the people in my group, where they are spiritually. And I have somebody that I've not met, and I'm a leader or an assistant leader maybe, that knows how to do this. And I'm talking to them, we were just having a walk. Let's say we're walking out here, and I'm like, oh, the view is just gorgeous. Don't you love this? And they're like, yeah, it's absolutely beautiful. And then I could say something like, when I was young, I had this youth group in my church, and we used to go through walks like this. And it was something I always looked forward to. Did you ever have experiences like that? So it's talking about the walks I had, and it's a non-confrontational way of just talking about faith as well. And even though you're talking about, did you have experiences like that in your youth, they'll trigger on the your youth group in a church. That's usually what they'll trigger on. And so most people will let you know where they are spiritually very quickly in that conversation. They'll usually say something like, no, I never had that experience. And then I would say, if it's vague like that, then I'd say, oh, you never had walks like this? No, I never went to church as a kid. Oh, I gotcha. That's unusual. I know it's not unusual now, but, it was unusual back in the day. So is that your experience now, too? I mean, it's just, you do it very conversationally, and people will begin telling you more and more about their spiritual life. And you might have like 10 sentences between everything I just mentioned. It's just something that you're doing in a conversation, getting to know somebody, but you're also getting to know where they are spiritually. And you're doing that not to trick people, but to serve people. Because we want to serve people. And if we know where they are spiritually, we know better how to serve them. So maybe the person I'm walking with says, I did go to church as a youth. And I say, oh, does your church still do that? Oh, I haven't gone to church for years. Oh, really? Mind if I ask? What made you decide that? And they can say, I don't believe in God anymore. Or they could say, I just kind of drifted away. I believe in God, but I got busy. So all these things help you narrow down where they are on this spiritual scale. And so when you get to the point of, let's say they're a -2, then I know, and I've done this for my churches, and you can do this for yours easily. I give people an idea of what you should do wherever they are on the scale. So again, -4 and below to -10, the really only thing to do is to develop a friendship. In fact, what I do when I find people like that in my groups is I get some of the other Adventists in my group, and I say, this is somebody that we need to develop a relationship with. The fastest way to help them grow is for them to learn about Christians. Not about Christianity, about Christians. That they see normal people. Let me give you another example of how the world sees Christians today. There was a homosexual Adventist who has a lot of friends in the world who came to Called Convention to talk about what it's like, what that is like, what they're going through. And their friends offered this guy a gun. They offered to hire bodyguards because they assumed if he came to a place with Christians that they were going to kill him. They assumed that that's what's going to happen. They said, well, the very least is you're going to get beat up. And I give you that story to let you know that the world does not see us, especially the world that might be farther and farther down the scale. They do not see us as we see us. They think of us as actively hostile towards them, and even to the point of physical violence. And so when you're working with people like this, just letting them know we're normal, hopefully you're normal, right? But letting them know you're normal is a huge step, and it moves them along this scale. Just letting them know that you're a caring, kind human being. Because what's going on in the world today, just happened in the news. People who are on the far left of the scale, they're saying these Christians are taking over politics. They're going to force their religion down, and they're seeing us not as trying to protect life. They see us as trying to take over the world and force the religion down their throat. And they don't see it as a positive thing. They see it as a combative thing. Does that make sense? So we've got to remember, people see their worldview is different than ours. And so if we want to help them understand Christ, then we have to show them Christ in our life. And this is exactly what Jesus did, right? This is Christ mingled with the people as one who sought their good, not as one who sought to evangelize them right away, right? But one who wanted to meet their needs, serve their needs, did all these things, and won their confidence, then said, follow me. And all we're doing is exactly that. This really is that quote. That quote is what we're using for this, from Ellen White, and using what Jesus did, what we saw. The woman at the well, the woman caught in adultery, all of these different things, that we see. John 3:16, that speech he's making, all these things are teaching. How does Jesus teach people where they're at to get to the next level? Jesus developing his disciples, all these things. So you can read the Bible and read Ellen White and redo this if you'd like, however you want. Again, this is just my tool. You can use it or you can change it. But we teach our people to have those conversations with their small groups so that they can identify where people are and make a plan of helping nudge them 1 or 2 spaces to the right. Now, if you get somebody, like I said, at a -2 or a -1, that's when we begin bringing the Bible in and making big asks somewhere in that group time, especially when they're getting to the point where they're ready to say yes. And you've probably all seen, I'm assuming you all seen, like basically a way to ask somebody how to say yes to Jesus. Have you all seen something like that? Like, do you have a plan if somebody was close to saying yes to Jesus? Do you know how to move them to say yes? Do you want me to show you real quick what I do? It's not something I invented. It's something that somebody showed me, and I thought it was genius, so I use it, and it works great. But again, I'm in a relationship with this person. I know that they're ready to say yes. I know that there may be a few things in their life that's not lining up with what we do and how we behave, but they're ready to say yes to Jesus, and they want to say yes. I just begin to have a conversation with them when it's the right time, when there's, I'm not shoving it down the throat, but when they're ready to talk. And I usually have a piece of paper. Maybe we're having, we're not at our small group. Maybe I invited them to a meal or something. I'll have paper or a napkin, it doesn't matter. And I just start saying, it's interesting what sin has done in the world. And then I just wait for them to react. I don't say a word. And they'll say something like, well, yeah, it's been bad, or what do you mean? And then I'll say, well, let me show you on this paper. And so I'll draw something like this. And I say, God is right here. And he really wants to be connected to us. But sin, it's created this huge cavern between us. In fact, it's so big that nobody can cross it. It's impossible. And we're over here on this side. And so when we're over here, how do we get to God? Because sin has broken that relationship. How do we get to him? And I said, but guess what? God had a plan for sin. And they usually like, really, what is it? And so I said, it was called the cross. When Jesus died for us, on the cross, he made this bridge so that we can get from where we are and get across this chasm of sin to God. And all we have to do is accept Jesus in our life, say yes to him, and let him be the Lord of our life. And I'm giving you kind of a shortened version of it. But then I ask them, and I hand the pen or pencil, whatever it is, to them, and I say, mark where you see yourself on this little, whatever you call it, drawing. Mark where you see yourself here. And they usually go like this, an X right there. Because I know them, I've been in experience. I don't do this with just random people. But I ask them, where do you see yourself? And they usually mark themselves right there. And then I ask the question, would you like to cross over onto God's side? And almost always, because I know them, I know that's what the next step is. And sometimes, though, that there's people who say, I've got these things in my life. And I was like, do you think God doesn't know that? Do you think Jesus didn't die for those things in your life? And so it doesn't usually take too long for people to understand that Christ loves them right where they are, and that he'll work on those things in their life at another time. And so when they say yes, they want to cross over, then I say, all we have to do is ask, because Jesus paid the price at the cross for you to be on that other side. And I say, usually what we do is we have a prayer and ask God to help us and to forgive us and to bring us onto his side. Would you like to have that prayer right now? And in fact, I would, if you want, if you feel uncomfortable, I'll lead the prayer, and then you just repeat what I say, as long as it's what's in your heart. And people's like, yeah, I'd like you to do that. Would you do that? And so I just begin to pray. I'm like, dear Jesus, thank you for hearing us today. And the person will say the same thing. And I say, Jesus, I want you to forgive my sin. I don't want this separation between us anymore. Jesus, I love you and I want you to be the Lord of my life. I want to live with you forever. And I thank you that you have forgiven me right now for everything I've ever done. I thank you that you paid the price for my sin. I thank you that I am your child. I love you, Jesus. Amen. That's basically a sinner's prayer. And they move from -1 to +1. And then again, my job as a small group leader is continue to work with them, continue to have a relationship with them, help them to grow as a disciple. But every one of these steps are vital to get to somebody to that point, right? We've got to know how to reach somebody at a -8, to move them to a -7 or 6. We've got to know how to move a -4 to a -3 or -2. Because all we've been focusing on is the -2s and -1s. We're missing out on the majority of people who are far from Christ right now. So that's why small groups can be so powerful. Because you don't necessarily have to have a religious themed small group to move people to Jesus Christ. Does that make sense? So what we're saying is you could have a biking group, a hiking group, a photography group, an art group, a crochet group, anything, and that group can lead somebody to Jesus Christ. In fact, often more powerfully and effectively than a group that is religiously focused. Because we're doing it in a relationship with people just like Jesus did. All right? So I could talk about this forever. I love this stuff. So this is what we're training when we're training our leaders. One of the key things they have to know is how to take that step. All right? Any feedback or questions on this? Because this is an important one. Does everybody understand it clearly? It's a little difficult because it's the first time you're hearing it. And maybe it is. Have you seen that I'm assuming you've seen that before, right?
Not exactly like this.
Okay.
I've been exposed to the FORT program.
Yeah.
Family occupation.
Right. But have you seen the little gap in the sin thing? That you never saw that, really. That was really big about 20 years ago when I learned about it. Yeah. You've seen it? Yeah. It's very powerful. Other people have seen it? Yeah.
I wasn't crying when you were saying that prayer. But I was hearing in my head that person that you were praying with.
Yeah.
And I'm not crying, you're crying.
Yeah. No. Honestly, I could do that. Every time I do that in a group, I can make everybody cry if I was trying to move, make people emotional. Because the sinner's prayer is one of the most powerful things you'll ever hear in your life. And everybody who hears it, we're praying it ourselves, even though we know he said yes. We still are praying it anyway. Because we always want to keep saying yes. We want to keep going towards the cross. And so, yeah, it's very, very important. So, any questions at all? Comments? You can go on. All right. So, leading a small group. There are certain things that you need to know if you're going to have an effective small group ministry. Is the training of those who are leading is where it lies. If you don't do this right, it fails, and it fails. And so you've got to know exactly what you want to do and where you're going. It's so important to have this goal. So what is a major goal of each small group leader should have? One of the major goals is an assistant leader. So we are training them how to train others. Guess what that is? Discipleship. When you're training leaders of any type, we are always training leaders to make leaders, to make leaders who make leaders. That is how Jesus did it. That is how we're called to do things. That is God's multiplication process. So when I'm training small group leaders, I'm training them how to train their assistants. And so we've got to make sure that when they're training their assistants, they know how to do it right. So what we do is, first we give them the training on how to lead a group, and then we share with them. So when you have, let's say you're doing a book on the Bible, or you're doing a bike riding group, or whatever it is, you want to identify an assistant leader. It has to be somebody who is a Christian. Now, on the very, very rare case that you have like a group that nobody from the church joined but you, and it's all people who are not Christian, that is the only time that you do not have to have an assistant leader. Because it'd be hard for somebody to understand how to do this as somebody who, but as long as they are Christian, they don't even have to be Adventist, because if you make an assistant leader who's not an Adventist, they'll become an Adventist. It happens all the time. All the time. But again, you're not giving them like carte blanche leadership of the group. You're giving them pieces, though. And so if you have it, most of the time, the assistant leader will be somebody from your church who's joined your group, and you're giving them a little bit at a time. You've identified who they are, you picked out who that's going to be, and then you say, hey, next week, let's say you're doing a study group, and you're doing it on the Desire of Ages, and you say, hey, next week, we're going to be covering this section of Desire Ages, and there's a really interesting part in this. Would you take about 2 or 3 minutes to discuss this next week? Give them a real small piece. And then the next week, you give them something a little bit more. And the next week, and we want to have, by the end of the 3-month period, we want your assistant leader to be doing over half of the leading of the group. So an effective leader is passing leadership. That's how you grow. And that's why a lot of small group programs that have been happening in Christian churches, not just Adventists, they start out, people are excited, people are going, but then a leader drops here and another leader drops there. This leader moves away. This leader gets tired of it. And pretty soon you don't have any small groups left. And so you need to have continually a new pipeline of small group leaders. And that helps disciple them as well. So you're doing all the things you need to do on that scale too. When you're developing an assistant leader, you're helping them grow as a disciple as well and nudging them along as well. So very, very important to pick a leader, develop a leader, help them grow. Maybe you want to plant a church. I know I've heard a lot of people talking about planting a church here. 3 different people talking about planting churches here. I've planted several churches out of small groups. They grew, the team loved each other. Maybe they all lived in the same area. I know the first church I planted out of a small group, I was like, it was weird, like all of these members all at the same time moved into this one community. None of them planned it, but just they kept moving in just one community. We didn't know why. And then we said, wait a minute, God is doing something here. And so I had a small group leader that was in that community, and people in that neighborhood were coming to it, Adventist and non-Adventist. I said, what do you think about making this into a new church in this region? And he's like, I love it. And so that was part of what they did. They transformed that group into the core team of a church plant, and we trained them how to actually become a church as well. And so it's an excellent way, if that's something your church is looking to do, using a small group can help you multiply not just leaders and new assistant leaders, but it can help you multiply a new church as well. That's the same thing. So one of the things you need to do in training is you need to train your leaders how to deal with difficult members. This is very, very important. You should be training your Sabbath school leaders how to do this. You should be training your elders how to do this. But we don't have training on doing this. And what do I mean by difficult members? I'm not meaning like maybe they're crabby, I don't know. But they disrupt the flow of a group. Have you ever been in a group where somebody wants to just talk the whole time? Just talk and dominate the whole conversation. That's not helpful to the group. I remember I started a group in Manhattan a couple of years ago for young adults, and we were doing a small group on Friday nights in the village. And we had gotten a lot of Adventist young adults to come back to church, people from the community, But there was this one guy from the church, and every time they would ask a question, he just da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. And in every single thing that was said, anybody who said something, he had to have 4 stories to talk about his life. And so that, I was just showing these young people how to run a group. I was the leader because none of them had ever done it. I passed it off the next time because I'm not a young adult, so it's kind of weird for me to be in the group to begin with. But I had to bring the guy aside after the meeting, and I said, listen, what you said was great. Thank you for participating, and I appreciate your enthusiasm. But I don't know if you noticed, you were kind of dominating the conversation, and there's a lot of people in our group, and we really need to give everyone a chance to share. And he said, oh, I'm so sorry, I didn't recognize that. He said, I have a tendency to just go on when I get excited. And I said, I understand. The next week came, he started doing the same thing. So this time, instead of being more gracious, I became more forceful. And when he started talking, I would just say, that's a good point, but let me hear from you. And just kept stopping him. And kept stopping. He kept trying it. And I just kept stopping him. The group knew what I was doing because there was a tension building because of him. And so after the group, I went and talked to him again. I said, are you not able to help yourself? You just can't stop? And he said, yeah, I just can't stop. He said, I'm messing up this group, aren't I? And I said, it is becoming difficult. And he just didn't come back. He was already a church member. If he wasn't a church member, I might have handled it differently. But we didn't want a church member destroying this group that was reaching so many people who were former Adventists, non-attending Adventists, and people in the community. So you've got to be able to deal with those people. You got people that might have strange theology that they want to push in a group. You have to shut those things down. You can't let them bring those things into the group. And if they begin to discuss those things, say, you know what? That's not what this group is about. If you really want to talk about those things, go to the church. If it's a church member, go to the church and ask if you can do a group next time. Make sure to tell them what you want to talk about, though, because they're never going to let them be a group. But this group we're focusing on this. And if they don't understand it, and I see that in front of the group. If it's somebody who's trying to lead us this way, astray, I do that in front of the group. I'm not as kind as I would be somebody who's doing something different. I'm not mean, but I'm very direct about it because I want the group to know that's not acceptable, and we're not going to let people do that, hijack us that way. You've got people who are really emotionally needy, and groups are very good at supporting each other, and we want that. When there's things going on in your life, and if there's something terrible going on in somebody's life, we want them right at that moment to have that emotional need. But there are some people that are just constantly needy, and they will suck the life out of a group if you're not careful. So meet their needs, but if they continue every week to have these world-shattering problems that really are really minor things, and it's more of an issue internally, you need to do the same thing. Take them aside and say, a lot of people have issues, but we're focusing so much time on yours. And then I often say, do you need somebody to talk to? Because this group is there to support, but we're not therapists. Is there somebody that you could use? Can we help you in any way? So you got to make sure you're dealing. So there's a lot of different things. Can anybody think of any other difficult members they've ever seen? Yeah.
Not necessarily about theology, but just going off topic.
Oh, that's a great one. That happens all the time.
Way off topic.
Oh, exactly.
In this chapter, we're not talking about this.
No, in fact, that is part of our training is off topic. Boom. Yeah, so, people are taking you, totally tangent directions. That's a very easy fix. That is very interesting, but, we're trying to focus on this. Let's get back on topic. And, teachers have to do that all the time with students doing that. That's a normal thing we've all seen. But, it happens all the time. Any others that you can think of? there'd be difficulties in a small group with members. There's a few others. One is people who show up really late and expect you to catch them up. We don't catch people up.
Or expect her to catch me up.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. The side conversation. That's another difficulty. Yeah, exactly. When somebody's speaking, we don't have one person dominating conversations, but when somebody's speaking, the others need to have respect and not having side conversations. There's a lot of things that you can talk about. And I always ask people, what have you experienced? What have you experienced? And in fact, when we do our leadership training, that's 2 weeks, or 2 Sundays. It's one Sunday and then the next Sunday. But once the groups begin, we have one night a week that no groups are allowed to meet. We can use that so we can have church board that night. We can have different things that are happening for the church that night. But we also have one of those weeks, we have all the small group leaders meet, and we talk about what's going on in their groups. How are they dealing with these people that they're meeting? How's the nudge evangelism working? And then what are difficulties they're finding? And we always get these funny stories, sometimes scary stories, but different stories about people. Another one is the clinger. People who cling and don't want to leave. So what we often do is it doesn't always work out, but we'd love to have, if there's a leader of the small group and a host of the small group, and they're different. That is really effective. If you can have somebody who leads a small group, but at somebody else's location, like if you're doing something in a house, then the leader can force people out without being rude. But we talk about it right at the beginning. We are the guest in this house, and there's a couple of rules that we're going to follow in this small group. We train this. One is we're going to leave the house like we found it. We're going to work together to do the dishes if we made dishes, clean anything we messed up, so when we leave this host home, it looked exactly like we found it. Because we don't want the hardest part of the job is to be a host. Because you want your house to look nice for all these people, and you don't want to have to clean up after a group every time, that messed up your house. They're not going to want to do it anymore if you do that. And 2, when we're done and we get everything cleaned up, we're all going to leave because this is their home. And we may want to chat, but they may want to go to bed. Or they may have other things to do. So we're not going to extend our stay beyond what we're saying our time is. And everybody agrees to that at the beginning when we do it. So it's very simple. So, but you want to train these things, because if you don't train your small group leaders how to deal with difficulties before they have a group, they're going to become discouraged. They're not going to like it. They're not going to know what to do. Their group might be destroyed. There's so many things that are negative if you don't prepare your leaders well beforehand. So, how do you make your small groups effective? How did I make a church with 140 in attendance? How did I launch 27 small groups at once? And how did I have 240 in attendance in my small groups? What did I do? And that's what I'm about to show you this part now. So this section is about really making this thing work. You've trained your leaders. You know what your groups are going to be. Now, how do you make it flourish? So we advertise our small groups in several different ways. I told you already we make these small booklets. We've been preparing our church. We know who's going to be leading. We know what kind of classes they're going to do. We make these little booklets, and we actually spend some money on these booklets. They have a nice, shiny, good-looking cover, and every single page is a description of one of our groups. And so it'll talk about the group title. It'll show a little map and an address where it's going to be at. So if it's a hiking group where now sometimes they might meet in different locations, so it'll say that. It talks about the time that they're going to meet, the day they're going to meet. It talks about if you need to bring anything, like if it's a photography group, you need to bring a camera, right? You need to have certain kinds of clothing you're wearing. It talks about if there's childcare, if you're doing a group in a home, and maybe it's family oriented, you might want to have, a group hire a couple of babysitters for the children during that time. It talks about if there's a cost involved, if there's maybe a book that you need to be buying and bringing with you, whatever the requirements are for the book or for the group, it's in that book. Then it has like a paragraph or two description of the group. The leaders, we train them how to make that so that it's clear and understandable what the group's about, what our goals are, what we're aiming towards doing. And then, of course, it has the leader's contact information. So every page of this little booklet has one of those. You flip the page, the next one. And so in this booklet, we have all of our groups. And so that's one thing we use. We start handing that out in our community. I leave a couple in the laundromats, different things. But we also do personal invitations. And the number one way you grow a group is by inviting people to it yourself. If you're the leader, that's how you're going to get people to come to your group. You just say, hey, we're going to do this new group, whatever you're doing. We had a jogging group. We've had so many different things. So whatever you like doing, it can be a study group. Our biggest groups we've had is a young adult group that was studying books of Ellen White, which was surprising to us that would be such a huge hit. But one of the reasons it was a huge hit is they made some amazing food. And young adults are attracted to food. So that was a very smart group leaders. They made amazing food. They invited me several times to that group. I loved it when they did. But we also have what we call our small group Sabbath. So I mentioned to you that we have terms, that all the small groups start the same week and they end the same week. So this is how we do it, is the week before we're actually going to have the small group start. In our church, we have a small group Sabbath. And in our foyer, we have all these tables set up, and every table is a different booth advertising that small group. And so let's say I was preaching, I'm going to have a sermon that's talking about the benefits of small groups in some way, of community or something. And I'm going to have a sermon, and then I'm going to talk about how we are launching our small groups this week, and I want to invite all of our small group leaders to stand. And they all stand, and while they're standing, we're handing out the pamphlets, the booklets. Everybody's getting a booklet. And I say, these people are giving up their time. We want to celebrate what they're doing and thank them for what they're doing. And they go out to their booths, wherever their booth is. Now, their booth is decorated however they want. In fact, we encourage them to be creative and spend some time to make it attractive. We have, the very first one we did, I mentioned that one of our groups, we had a professional actor in one of our churches. He's a young guy, and he did like community theater acting. And he did a group on bringing people to different community theaters in the region, and once a week they just go see different things. And so to advertise his group, he built a theater about the size of a table, built a theater. It was gorgeous, decorated. It had curtains that opened and closed. It had lights in it. Talk about attracting people to your group. It was amazing. We had an artist that made a sculpture for his group. Our jogging group, she put up a big TV that had all these cool scenes of places they were going to go. We had some people who cheated. They made brownies and put a little fan by it, and so the smell was going everywhere. Whatever you want to do, as long as within reason. The only thing, we had a couple rules: no popcorn, because that is so hard to clean out of your carpets in your church. I hate that. So nobody could do popcorn, those types of things. But and you can't force people to join. You can ask people if they want to join, but you can't be like, hey, you need to sign on this. You don't make people feel guilty if they don't join your group. You can ask them, but don't make them feel guilty. So everybody's out there at their booth, and I'm in the church preaching, and when we finish with our prayer, I say, now, what I'd like you to do is take some time, look through that book, go wander around and look at and talk to the different leaders. And at the back of the book that we have, there's some sign-up sheets. And you can tear them out of the book. And what you do is you give your name, your contact information. And if you want to join one of those groups, you just give them your sign-up sheet. So I had them fill it out right now. And I say, fill out one of those sign-up sheets right now. And so they fill it out. And you can join at least, now you can't do this in your church because you're not a church planter, but in a church plant, I require everyone to join a group. You have to, period. You have to join a group. But in your group, in your churches, you can encourage people to join a group. And most people are happy to do it when you have this kind of system because people are excited about it. And we tell people, now, when you're joining a group, there's a couple of things you're doing. One, you're making a commitment for a couple of months that you're going to stick with this group. And two, you're also making a commitment that you're going to invite other people too. Your family, your friends, whoever it is, your neighbors. Start inviting some people that you know because we want our groups to grow and be useful for the community. And so when they go out there and they finally find a group that they really want to be part of, they give them their little handwritten thing that says their name, their contact information, and that leader's gathering all these people that are going to be in their group. Now the leader beforehand has asked people. They've already said, hey, would you join my group? Would you join my group? So they may already have 4 or 5 people that have already right away are joining. Yes, I'm joining. And that's the best leaders are always the ones that are inviting people early because they grow their groups faster. Does this make sense? I mean, it may sound a touch complicated, but it's very strategic on how to grow an effective small group ministry. And so when you have these booths and people are wandering around, we have leaders, talking and people are connecting. And it's very easy, actually, at that point to get people excited about your small groups process. So on the very first Sabbath then, when you got people coming, or not Sabbath, the very first meeting of your small group, before that, the leader is contacting everybody, reminding them of the location, reminding them of the time, reminding them of any requirements, those type of things, and thanking them for joining the group. And so, what if, though, that group fails? Now, this happens sometimes. You may have what you think is a great idea, and nobody else is interested in that idea. And that happens occasionally, not that often, but I actually happened into one of my groups. I used to be a financial planner, and so I led a personal budgeting group, and I led it 2 times in a row. Both times, first time was jam-packed, the next time was jam-packed, and I led it the 3rd time, and nobody joined. And I just wow, must be everybody who wanted to do that has gone through it now, because it wasn't one of those group classes that you're like, well, I want to do this for the rest of my life, because it was the same information every time. And I was like, I'm glad it happened to me, because then I could have this story that says, I'm the one putting this together, and it's even happened to me. And all you do is if the group fails, then the first thing you do is find another group that needs help, and you go join that group. It's great to have a couple leaders in a group, but just know that the next time you can try again and see if it works, or make a tweak. Maybe you did something that didn't attract people, or find something totally different to do. Does that make sense? So we want to make sure you prepare your people just in case, because if they have a group that doesn't happen and it fails, and you don't prepare them, they're going to be very discouraged if they don't know that's a possibility. All right, so this is how I get churches to launch small groups. And this is the outline of this. And this is your other handout. So it has a lot more details on this purple sheet. Steps to launching an effective small group ministry in your church. If you follow this outline based on the training that you've had, you'll be much more effective at launching it with your church. Now, not every church is going to say yes. Maybe you're like gung-ho on church small groups and they've had a bad experience and they don't want to do it. Well, you maybe just launch one yourself. But define again why small groups are important. You got to get people excited about them, how they're impactful. You got to get buy-in from the pastor, buy-in from the elder. And I do this usually one at a time, working with people. And if the pastor does not agree to be part of the small group process, it's far less likely to succeed. Just be honest with you. Now, if you got a pastor who's in a large district, though, then the head elder is the key person. Whoever's the person that kind of is seen as the head of that church. Sometimes pastors have 4 or 5 churches, and the head elder's viewed more as the head of the church. You got to continue to cast vision. Get the church excited about it. They need to know that what's going on. You ask the pastor to put some of these things in sermons if they can. And then, of course, create the training. You've got to train your leaders. That's why it's the bold one. I can't stress enough. If you don't do the training well, the small groups don't go well. So you've got to have a good training. And you know what? It may take time to do that. Create a list of groups. So you're asking people who wants to lead, what would you like to do? Again, they can do basically almost anything they want. Have the small group Sabbath with the booths, the tables set up. And then that week you're going to be launching your groups. During the session, you have assistant leaders that are being trained in the groups. Plus, you might have some other people who are not assistant leaders who say, I'd like to do a group next time. So somewhere in the middle of those 3.5 months, you're going to have those 2 Sundays of training again. So every term, I'm going to have those 2 Sundays happening again because they're going to be brand new leaders who've never gone through the full training. So that has to be planned in the future, so you're doing that. You create the new book, train the new leaders, and create the new book of new groups. So while the groups are happening, you're asking the leaders, what are you going to do next time? Usually a month and a half or so out, you have everybody figured out what they want to do the next time. Create the new book. And then, here's one thing you haven't heard yet. What do we do at the end of the small group session? This is unique. So you don't have to do it like we do it, but we do a banquet for every single small group member that we have, period. All of them. We invite every one of them to a special banquet they don't have to pay for. And this is very evangelistic. So we use our money to do this. And so we bring them to a banquet. It's usually fairly nicely done. It doesn't matter if your members make the food, or I think members make better food than most restaurants anyway. Have the food laid out, have nice tablecloths. And what we've asked our leaders and our assistant leaders to do is to take pictures during their small groups. And then we gather all these pictures, and we have a screen up, maybe 2 screens up. And while the banquet's going on, we might have some music playing at times, speaking at other times, but we have these pictures flashing of all these different groups, people having fun, different, people studying, whatever it is. And we have the books ready by the time we have the banquet. So at the banquet, we're not making it a church service because, again, you might have a lot of atheists or agnostics there. They may have joined a hiking group. They may have joined a photography class, and they did not join something that was religiously focused. So we don't want to try and sneak in a religious service on them. People will be offended by that. We will have a quick prayer for the food because they've already seen us praying as a group. or doing something spiritually. So they know we're Christians, but we're not going to try and slip in a church service or tell them you're not going to church on Saturday, you're something wrong with you. Don't do that during the banquet. That's not effective. But in the banquet, talk and have different people coming up, talking about cool experiences they had, not conversion stories. That's not what we're looking for. This isn't the place to talk about conversion stories. This is a place to talk about relationship stories or adventure stories or any type of thing like that, cool things like that. And in fact, it's good to have people from the church and people who are outside the church talk about some of the cool things they saw. And then we'll mention to them. Now we have a small break between our groups, and we're going to be starting a whole nother set of groups again. And we're handing out all these booklets just like we do at the Sabbath. And we say we have a ton of different groups, and we had them kind of flashing now up on the screen, the different kinds of groups that we're going to have. And so somebody who maybe my neighbor, maybe I did a hiking group and my neighbor had joined me, and he's at the banquet with me, and he's looking at this thing, and he's like, oh, there's a personal budgeting group coming up, a group working with personal finances. I really need help with that. And so they may decide to join that group. They may say, that's the group I want to be part of. Or they may still do your hiking group too. They may join too. And so every time we have additional touches with people like that, they're far more likely to say yes to Jesus eventually. In fact, do you know if somebody has 6 friends in a church, the odds are extremely high that they will join that church. Very high. So this actually helps in that as well. They're seeing people at a banquet that are part of the church and not part of the church as well. But if they join another group, then they have more contacts and build more friendship with Christians, and it moves them closer and closer towards Jesus. Does that make sense? So the banquet costs a little bit money. It's the most expensive thing that we do in our small groups, but it's very much worth it. And then you just keep repeating those steps. Every term, you do the same thing again, same thing again, same thing again. It's very, very, very effective. Let me give some handouts here so you know what I'm talking about, some of you. Let me give you that handout there. Did you get a handout? Does anybody else need handouts? Just want to make sure everybody has handouts so we don't lose people as I'm talking. All right, any questions on that? Did you get a handout? Here you are. Any questions or comments so far? All right, so it may seem like there's a lot of parts to this, but that's why I gave you that purple sheet, so you can remember the order that it works in, because that's really what you want to do. So this is typically what I do, is I give people homework. You could choose to do any of these things. You don't have to do all of them. But come up with 2 or 3 possible groups that you can lead. And this is something I might be doing in a church as well. Is maybe I'm talking to the church when we're about to start small groups, and I think about it. What are 2 or 3 possibilities of groups that you can lead? 2, list at least 10 people you will invite to your groups. So who do you want to come? And again, it can be neighbors, it doesn't matter. Pray, and pray again about this. And then write down any questions on areas that you're not clear to you. And then, I don't know what the Slavi thing is, but oh, I know why that's in there. Because I did this with somebody in Serbia recently. And I didn't take that off that slide. So those 4 things are really something that we talk about with people. You know, come up with possibilities in your church. And people love this. I'm really surprised. I was actually surprised it worked so well. I was very surprised. I was surprised how, and especially I think after the pandemic, this is a great time to do this because there's been so much isolation, and the amount of people who are suffering from depression, because of the fears that are happening in the world, people need connections. There's so much loneliness, and people are excited about doing this. They may not want to lead a group, but they'd be willing to help somebody, maybe a host in their home, or they'll be willing to be an assistant leader at least, or at least join a group, or invite people to a group, whatever it is. But all of these things are ways to help and grow your church plant. All right, any feedback, questions? Yes?
How many groups, just one at a time, people can sign up for?
You can sign up for 4 groups if you want, as long as you're willing to commit. That's what we tell people. If you sign up for a group, commit to that time slot. And so it's hard to sign up for more than maybe 2 because you're committing for basically 3 months. Because we don't want groups to start off with 12 people, and 5 of them are for the community, and then the church members, half of them quit. There's a letdown as you see it shrink. So, if there's a major emergency in somebody's life and they have to quit, that's different. But we want people to make a covenant to stick with it. Yeah. But yeah, I usually join 2 groups. And there's usually a lot more I want to join, I just don't have time. So, and always get somebody who knows what they're doing to make the booklet. You want it to look nice. I did the first one, it looked okay. But when I got somebody who really knew what they're doing, wow, that really draws people's eye when you have something that looks sharp. And with today's technology, it's so easy to do it really well. All right, good question. Any other questions? All right, anybody thinking about doing small groups in their church now? Yeah, you thinking that might be? How about you guys? Anybody thinking that might be a good idea?
Well, our church is small,
Yeah, that's okay.
so,
That's even a better church to do it with. Small churches are easy to do small groups with because you can do 2 or 3 of them and invite the community and then double your size fast, very quick. Small groups are, I think, one of the most effective evangelistic tools you can find. Our churches, if people think that it's something that I'm doing special when they see how fast our churches grow, it's because we're strategic on how we reach people. Everything we do has a purpose, and that is to move people to positive 10, to become more and more Christ-like. We want to move people in that direction. So not just our small groups, but how we do outreach is unique. And in fact, if you're around Thursday and Friday, this is something, whether your church wants to do small groups or not, we're going to be doing a group or a class on how to do greeting and how to do assimilation that will revolutionize churches. Greeting teams, like something you've never seen before. So this is what we tell our greeters. I'm giving you a little commercial now. Our greeters are told this: within 10 minutes of a new person walking in the church, your job is to make sure they never want to go anywhere else. How do you do that? By saying, "Happy Sabbath, here's your bulletin." You don't. So it's totally different. And so, again, it's a very strategic way to help people want to be part of that family. And so we work on that. This phone's not stopping. So that's what I'll be doing on Thursday at 2 o'clock and Friday at 2 o'clock. And then how do you get people, once they start coming, to keep coming? Once they start coming, how do you get people to keep coming and become an actual effective part of the family? How do you get them to assimilate? That's what assimilation is called. So what is a process we can use as churches, even if they're small? It doesn't matter. How many are in your church, ma'am? You said you had a small church.
well,
Oh, that's not small. That's not bad. There's churches that are like 5, so. But how many are in your community, like county or whatever?
About 100,000.
Oh, yeah. So you've got,
It's a college town.
oh, yeah. Small groups would be huge in that area. In fact, our most effective small group church was in a college town because college, So that's a very, it'll be more difficult maybe if you're in a town of 10, or, in the middle of absolutely nowhere. We do have a couple of churches in our conference like that, there is no cell service. You're absolutely, I'm not sure how they ever built a church in those towns. I'm glad they did. I don't know how they did, though. But the greeting system is another way to really, really attract, when you finally get somebody to come in your church. Let's say you do small groups, or let's say you do outreach, or whatever it is. There's the face of the church is the greeters. That's the first thing they see. That's the first impression. And if we don't do that well, we're missing a major opportunity. And so we're going to talk about how to do that with excellence, and it's not that hard. And we're going to give you actually the step-by-step instructions all the way through on how to do greeting very, very effectively. And then how to assimilate new people into the life of the church so they can be active members and leaders eventually as well. All right? Any other questions about small groups? All right, was this helpful? Okay, good, excellent. Well, thank you so much for being here. If we could, let's all stand and we'll have a closing prayer. All right, Lord, we are so grateful for the way that you lead. And we thank you, Lord, that you've called us to reach this world. Thank you that you've given us this great commission. And I pray, Lord, that as we go out and reach the world, that we use means and ways that will really build relationships so that they can see you through us. I pray, Lord, that any church here that's represented here that should have a small group ministry, that you make that possible through the people who've been here. I pray, Lord, that you use us in any way you see fit to effectively grow your kingdom. Thank you for loving us, Jesus. We love you so much. We love you so much. You are amazing. In your holy name, amen. Hey, thank you. God bless you all. Hope to see you Thursday. And remember, be evangelists and bring more people with you, too.